There's a big difference between telling yourself you can do something and actually doing it. When you're scared, what that means is you're having tremendous resistance to it. The more resistance you feel, the more certain you can be that you have to do it. And many people live their entire lives that way. They never do the first thing. They wake up when they're 70 years old and they never have done the thing.
Did you think that you were going to be the Steven Pressfield author that you are now when you were a kid?
No. Once you start, a certain magic happens. You know, if we're talking about a novel, start writing chapter 1. Even if you don't know what the ending is, just start writing it. Starting is everything. And then, of course, once you do day 1, you got to do day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. Once you've done it, and you've really done it, nobody can take that away from you.
Welcome to the Jen Gottlieb Show.
Hello, and welcome back to the Jen Gottlieb Show. Are you ready for this interview? I don't think you are, but we're going to start before you're ready because that is what this guest is all about. I'm so excited because I took a chance and I DM'd one of my favorite authors in the world, Steven Pressfield. He's written books like The Legend of Bagger Vance that turned into a Will Smith, Matt Damon movie. He wrote The War of Art. He wrote Turning Pro. He wrote Put Your Ass Where Your Heart Wants to Be, and lots of other personal development books. And most importantly, he is the one that created the quote that I say at the end of all my keynotes: start before you're ready, don't prepare, begin. Actually, Chris, my husband, has that quote tattooed on his arm. So we are major Steven Pressfield fans. And I took a risk and I sent him a DM and I said, would you want to be on the podcast? And I started before I was ready and he said yes. So what you're about to listen to is a really big moment for me because I took a risk. I asked someone to be on my show that I'm just a big fan of, and he didn't disappoint. So Steven and I talked about everything from resistance, how he had to overcome resistance in the beginning of his career, how his career is anything but linear. He spent years and years and years writing books that nobody ever saw, driving taxis, driving trucks, and he didn't have his first really big success until he was in his 50s. So if you're somebody that thinks that it's too late to start, if you're somebody that comes up against resistance a lot, or maybe the inner BFF, the blocker of future fulfillment, right? All of that noise that comes in whenever you're about to start something new, you definitely want to listen to this podcast because he breaks it all down, how you can overcome resistance and start to create before you feel ready. So without further ado, please enjoy my episode with Steven Pressfield. Steven Pressfield, welcome to the show.
Well, Jen, thank you for having me. It's great to meet you finally after all these years.
In my mind, all of these years. I have to tell you right as we get into this, that this entire meeting experience, this podcast, is a result of me overcoming resistance. Because I had massive resistance asking you to be on my podcast.
Oh, well, I'm glad you overcame it. How did you overcome it?
I don't even know. I thought, like, what would Steven say right now? And I felt the resistance. And I mean, I do daily with everything. And I was like sitting there. I remember, I think I tagged you in something like I always do. And I think you liked it or you saw it. And I was like, oh my gosh. And then I got the idea, like, what if maybe he would be on the show? That would be the most amazing thing. And then I immediately got the resistance. No, Jen. No, he wouldn't respond to you. It's not him in the DMs. It's somebody else that manages his social media, right? All the noise. Or maybe you should ask him, but you should think about it for a while. All the things. And then I was like, you know what? That's resistance. And the only reason that I was able to discover that was resistance in that moment was because of everything I've learned from you. So I was like, what would Steven do? Start before you're ready. Just ask him.
Well,
and
good for you for doing that. You know? Good for you for recognizing it, and good for you for doing it. You know,
well,
it took me like 10 years to learn how to do that. So, anyway, I'm glad you did it. Here we are.
All right. So I think I might be able to dive in a little bit deeper. Maybe we can find out where it happened.
Okay.
Because I really liked hearing about the year that you turned pro. You talk about the year that you turned pro, that year that you decided, screw it, I'm actually going to write until I come up with something. And I'd love to hear you talk about that story because I think there was a lot of overcoming resistance in that time.
Yeah.
When you had that typewriter in the back of your car.
Yeah. This was a long version of the story is that the first time I tried to write something, I got 99% of the way through a novel. I was like 23 or 24, I think, at the time. and resistance defeated me at the end, and I kind of choked and acted out, as they say in psychology, and I blew the whole thing up. And so for the next, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years, I was sort of accompanied by shame everywhere I went. I kind of left my whatever there was of my life behind. And at some point I decided the only way I'm going to get out of this is to kind of write my way out of this. I have to kind of overcome, the failure to finish this thing. And I had sort of run away. I had my typewriter with me in my van that I was living in at the time and driving around the country. But I never touched it because it sort of represented to me this failure, the shame of not finishing and blowing up a marriage and blah, 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 blah. And so at one point, the longer versions, I got a job in advertising in New York that paid me enough that in like a year and a half, I saved enough money that I thought I could live for a year. And to show you how long ago that was, the amount of money was $2,700. And I wound up living for 2 years on that. And so I moved to a place that I could afford in Northern California, rented a little house. And for 22 months, I think it was, I was just working on a novel. And my whole thing was just finish it. No matter what, finish it. And I hadn't given the name Resistance to anything, but I was very, very aware of my overwhelming tendency to quit something, not be able to see it through to the end, or to act out in some crazy way. Like, sometimes in people's lives, like if they're working for a job, they'll do something like insult their boss, or they'll, deliberately blow a presentation to destroy that job, right? To get fired. And I would sort of do the same thing in jobs, but also in this particular book, I was just terrified that I would do some acting out at the end, beyond my control. Emotion would take over. So I was very aware that there was a force. I didn't call it resistance, but that was kind of my thing through that whole, 22 months or however long it was to get to the end of it. The one thing I will say, I think maybe what you want me to talk about, I think maybe, was what a great 2 years that was for me, because, and I really wish any creative person could have an experience like that, because I was just alone in this house, me and my little cat, and I wrote all day and I read at night, and I was so out of it, that out of the real world of what was going on, that Watergate happened while this was going on. This is how long ago it was. And I didn't even know what was happening. I remember one day in my neighbor's yard, I heard they had the radio on, and I heard somebody speaking over the radio, to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the, and I again went outside. I said, what's going on? And he said, they got a new guy in there. Nixon's out, So in any event, it was a great experience for me to be sort of alone with my demons for all that time. And so anyway, that was that year. But I don't think or 2 years, I don't think I called it resistance then, but I was just very, very aware of it. And I did finish the book, and I read about this in The War of Art. And for anybody that's out there that has this trouble, I can say that from that time forward, I've never had trouble finishing anything ever again. So doing it the one time was a huge breakthrough for me.
Yeah. So basically you needed to give yourself proof that you could do it.
Yeah.
Right. You had that experience where you're like, every time, then probably in the future, you're like, come on, Stephen, you did this already.
Yeah.
And so you finished that book in that 2 years. And what was that book? What happened to that?
It never got published. It never came close to being published. But I did finish it. And that was so, like I say in The War of Art, nobody else knew, that I had finished that thing. Nobody cared. I was estranged from my family. Nobody knew. Nobody cared. But I knew. And that made all the difference. And the other thing, I think, for a lot of times when we're trying to overcome something like a failure to finish something, we'll do affirmations or we'll tell ourselves blah, blah, blah. But there's nothing like actually doing it, as I'm sure you know in your business and everything. Once you've done it and you've really done it, nobody can take that away from you, And when you do sort of fall into an imposter, dialogue in your mind, you can say to it, hey, that's just bullshit because it's okay if we say that, right?
Of course.
Because I did it. You've done it. So there's a big difference between telling yourself you can do something and actually doing it.
Was there any point in time during that 2 years where you were first doing it for the very first time where you just could not tell the difference between this resistance or maybe intuition? So I struggle a lot with what's the difference between resistance and intuition? Like, is this my intuition telling me that maybe you really should give up? I don't think that this is right. Or is it just bullshit, resistance, ego?
My mantra for that is, when in doubt, it's resistance. For me at least, it almost never is intuition. And certainly in that 22-month period, I was so aware of that force, that my tendency to sabotage myself, that I just knew every minute of the day that any voice I heard in my head was resistance, even though I couldn't give it that name. I just knew that I had that, wherever it came from, I had that tendency to blow things up. And so every day I'm not going to give in to that no matter what.
Was it just sheer willpower that kept you going, or did you have any tools or tactics that you used?
I think it was willpower, but I also, I was lucky in that I had a few mentors. I had a couple of mentors. Particularly, I had a friend that lived down the street that I write about, Paul Rink, that lived in a little camper. He was a writer about maybe 30 years older than me, and I would have coffee with him every morning, and he would kind of, encourage me and psych me up and stuff like that. And also, I had a lot of good habits in terms of getting up early, doing some exercise, all that sort of stuff. I definitely had the self-discipline of a regimented daily routine, and that helped a lot.
Where did that come from, though? Because I don't think you always had that.
I'm not sure where it came from. It just sort of seemed like common sense, that if I'm going to do this, I can't wait each day until I feel like doing it. I have to kind of put myself on a program, just like in the Marine Corps or something like that, get up and do A, B, C, D, and then do the work.
Yeah. It sounds like you made a decision. Sounds like you were like, all right, I'm deciding. I'm making a full body yes
Exactly,
choice.
yeah.
I'm making this decision. And basically, I don't think you really realized in the time that you were going to war with resistance, but you knew you were going to war with something.
Yes.
And you rose to the occasion and you committed. You stuck to that commitment you made with yourself. You did it. And you won at the end because you finished the book.
Yes. And the other aspect of this, Jen, is that because I was coming out of such a dark period, it was sort of like I was kind of scared straight. It's like I knew whatever happens, I don't want to go back to that other thing. And the only way to not go back to it was to keep going forward. It's a lot like kind of a 12-step program or something like that, where you just know, if I take one drink, I'm going down that rabbit hole, So I just have to, no matter what, I can't take that drink. I got to take it one day at a time and just keep going.
So you kept going. You wrote a book. You finished it. It didn't get picked up by anyone. No one read it. Still to this day, probably no one has read that book.
Exactly. No one's read it. Yeah.
So what happened after that? How did you keep going after you had that failed? You worked so hard. You suffered a lot. You wrote the book and nothing happened. And then what was the next step to just consistently to overcome resistance?
I wrote another book after that took about another 5 years of saving the money. And that also didn't sell.
So 2 now.
So now we're at 2. Now I'm like 38 years old or something like that. And
what are you doing for work at this time to make money?
I was driving a cab in New York. I was a bartender in New York. I got another job or a couple more jobs in advertising in New York. And I would just work, at night and on weekends on this second book. And then I had saved up enough money that I just quit my job and just worked, at home in New York to finish the second book. And that also didn't sell. So I just, you want me to keep going on what happened next?
I do want you to keep going.
This was like a real all is lost moment for me, because at the time now, that was like my third novel that I'd done. Each one took 2 years to write, plus however much long I had to work to save money. And none of them sold. None of them came close to. In fact, this third one, when I would show it to my friends, they would get those plastic smiles, So I knew, like, this really sucks, And so I knew I couldn't do another one. I didn't have the willpower to do this again, work for another 2 or 3 years, and then only. So I had a really dark period for like about 3 or 4 days where it was just me and my cat alone in my apartment. And then I had this idea, and I thought, why don't I try screenwriting? I've tried novel writing. That hasn't worked for me. But I have worked in advertising, and I know what a camera is. I know what a script is. I love movies. So I thought, well, let me go out to Hollywood and I failed as a novelist. Let me go fail as a screenwriter. And that kind of gave me at least hope for a little while. And the short version of that is that I did go out there, and by hook or by crook, I did wind up having kind of a 10-year sort of B-level or C-level career. But that kept me going because I was learning what a story was. And I was actually working. I got teamed up with a partner, with an older established writer. And so we were getting work through him, not through me. And so that kept me going through there. And then finally I had, at age 51 or 52, I had the idea for The Legend of Bagger Vance. The book became, and that finally sold as a book. So that was sort of the short version of that odyssey.
And that took off immediately, right?
It found a buyer right away, yeah.
Right away.
Yeah.
So you went from trying and trying and trying and failing to finally having this one hit.
It's like the old story of an overnight success that only takes you 30 years to get there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And everyone probably thought, Stephen Pressfield, overnight success, but really you knew.
Yeah.
You were putting in the work for years before
Which I think, you can tell me from the people that you know and you've talked to, that's really the story a lot of times of people, Like you ever see something like dramatic roles like Hugh Jackman or something like that, and then all of a sudden somewhere there'll be something where he has to dance, and the guy can dance and he can sing and he can do acrobat, and you realize this guy didn't pop out of nowhere.
Yeah.
He's been training since he was 4 years old, And so I think there's a lot of truth to that for entrepreneurs and everybody like that. Or athletes, There's that song they always play in the NBA finals where all that work, now it shows, and that does seem to be the way. Certainly the way it was for me.
I love the quote, don't compare your chapter 1 to somebody else's chapter 20.
Yeah, so true.
Most of the time you didn't see your chapter 1 through 20. Many people, they didn't see you writing the failed 3 books before the Legend of Bagger Vance hit and everything that you had to go through for that. Yeah. They just saw that and they're like, oh, why can't my first book be like Legend of Bagger Vance?
Or like a concert pianist where you watch them play and you go, but you never see the years where they were just playing scales and, practicing over and over and having failures. And, it doesn't show until they finally get out there under the spotlight. Yeah.
Do the work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you make this big success. How did that change anything for you from that moment moving forward as far as your creative process?
That's a great question. It did, but not for the reason that I might have thought. For whatever reason, and I still don't know why this happened. I think it's kind of a mysterious thing. When, let's say, during my movie business career, I probably wrote, in fact, I did write co-wrote maybe 33, 34, 35 screenplays. Only a few of them got made, but the others at least were written. But I never had really was writing from my true voice. It would be like, let's do a detective story, or let's do a Western, let's do a science fiction, do the best you could, but it wasn't really coming from some sort of mysterious place that was me. Whereas when the idea for The Legend of Bagger Vance came to me, it came to me in some different way, and it came out of my work in a different way than the other things had. And whatever that change was, it has stayed with me all those years. And I've always, the stuff I've done since then has come from me, from my heart. So it did change, but did change me, that book, but not in the sense of I had a little success. It was really an internal thing. And again, I don't know exactly what it was, but it was everything.
It feels like you found your authentic self and your truth in your creative work and where it came from. And maybe you were able to...
I found something. I don't know what it was. Yeah.
Would you say that this is where you started to realize the muse and this concept of being one with the muse? Can we talk about that a little?
Yeah. Yes. And yes. And yet I'd sort of had that before, but never like this. I'm a big believer in the muse and the goddess of inspiration. And I really feel like if I have a new idea for the next book or the book after that, it's never coming from me. It's coming from some other place, some higher dimension, and like an assignment that someone gives to you. And it always surprises me. I always have tremendous resistance. I always say, I can't do this, that kind of thing. But I've learned to trust it and to surrender to it and to believe in it. And that I think that somehow the goddess started giving me a deeper pipeline to her at that point than she had before. Don't ask me why. Maybe just because I put in so much time that I proved to her that I was for real and that I was a true servant of that force.
Yeah, I love this concept, and I want to dive into it a little bit more because I know there's a lot of creative people that listen to this, whether they're creating a business or they're creating content or they're writing books or speeches, and they get really stuck. And I love this concept of this is coming from outside of us, and it's a gift given. And like, what's your process with sitting down and talking to the muse and receiving it? I'd love to hear like how that works for you so that people listening can maybe start to play with this as a creative process.
Great question, Jen.
Yeah.
Because it is mysterious. I mean, like while I'm working on one project, which is almost always a book, I'm constantly looking out for what's the next one. And I'm sort of keeping my radio tuned to the cosmic radio station. And ideas sort of come in, like they do for all of us. You're in the shower, what about a story? What about, and I'll sort of pay attention to each one and sort of apply whatever standards I have to it. I'll sort of test it. I'll say, do I really like this thing? Is it interesting? But also the other thing I really look to is, am I scared of doing this? And that's the big thing for me, because I think that any project that you start, you want to be scared shitless of it. Otherwise, if you're not, there's something wrong. And this, again, kind of plugs into resistance. When you're scared, what that means is you're having tremendous resistance to it. And I'm a big believer, as you know, that the more resistance you feel to something, it's a good sign. The more resistance you feel, the more certain you can be that you have to do it. Because resistance, the demon behind resistance, knows infallibly what idea that you might have that is really good for your soul and for your progression. And it will try to stop you as hard as it possibly can. All those voices in your head, imposter, blah, 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 blah. So fear is one thing I really look for when I'm testing an idea. Is this the next idea or is it not the next idea? And then once I sort of have that fear, then I'll start exploring the idea more. Like, let's say it's an idea that involves, I'll just start opening files and, ask myself, I'll open a file called theme and I'll say, what is this damn thing about? Maybe it's a cowboy story or something like that. And I'll try to get to that. And then I'll go, is this what you want to hear? This,
1,000%. I want to hear the process.
I may be getting in too deep on this.
No.
But I have a certain criteria that I apply to any sort of story. Like I'll ask myself, who's the villain? Who's the hero? What's it about? What's the ending? What's the inciting incident? What's the act? The blah, blah, blah. All these certain things. And I'll test them out. I'll write a file about this. Who's the villain? Why is this person the villain? Does it come to Does this villain have the characteristics of other villains that I want it to have? And then what's the climax? How does this thing end? Et cetera, et cetera. And little by little, over a period of a few months, the story will start to take shape. And meanwhile, I'm finishing up whatever else I've been working on. And at a certain point, I'll say, this is a story. I can do something with this. And at that point, I have to sort of make a decision, because I write on spec, and fiction is that way, where you can't really write a proposal and get a contract. You got to write the whole damn thing and then hope that it sells, So I'll have to ask myself, do I love this enough that I can put in 2 years full time with no, and if I say yes to that, then I'll go ahead. And there's one other thing, Jen.
What?
And this is sort of related to fear. I'm a big believer at this point, at the beginning of something, that you should be plagued by tremendous self-doubt. And if you're not, something's wrong. So, because again, self-doubt is resistance. So if I'm hearing, all these voices like, this is a dumb idea, nobody's going to be interested in this except you're not capable of doing this, it's not commercial, you don't have whatever. All those voices that entrepreneurs and artists have. I want to be hearing those voices. That sort of, even though it scares the hell out of me, but that's the point. If you weren't hearing those voices, if you had a little tiny idea, you'd have little tiny voices. Whew,
that's good.
And if you have a big idea, you're going to have big voices. So if I want the big, so self-doubt, scary as it is an indicator that I'm on the right path.
Self-doubt, fear is a good thing. Move towards it.
Yeah.
You're listening to The Jen Gottlieb Show.
I want to talk about this idea of shadow careers that you talk about, because I know a lot of people with them.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people that are terrified to make a pivot. So I'd love for you, I'm not going to explain it, for you to explain what a shadow career is, and why people do those instead of what their heart really wants, and how they can pivot and how they can shift gears, even with resistance there in the passenger seat.
Well, in the movie business, there are lawyers called entertainment lawyers, and they represent actors, directors, writers, producers, and they're the guys that make the deals. They handle all of with the studios, And not too surprisingly, a lot of entertainment lawyers really would love to be directors or writers or something like that. And in fact, a lot of them have made that switch and been good, succeeded right away at it, Yeah. And so in this case, being an entertainment lawyer for these people is a shadow career. It's a career that's adjacent to what they really want to do. They'd love to be Stanley Kubrick, or Martin Scorsese or somebody like that, but they thought it's too risky, right? But if I go to law school, I'll be a partner in a firm eventually, blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of a torture. Advertising is another thing. You scratch any open a drawer of any copywriter's desk, and you find screenplays and novels and all these things that they're writing on the side, right? And that was me too. So like being a copywriter is a shadow career adjacent to being another kind of writer. And another thing is a lot of times people will be assistants to somebody, right? Usually somebody that's creative, a songwriter or a musician or something like that, and they'll be their personal assistant. And secretly, they really want to be a rock star or whatever it is, but they're afraid to make that leap. And I think eventually, when you do that, the pressure kind of builds up, and you say to yourself, I got to try this, or if you're an assistant, let's say to a musician, and at home you're writing your own music and you have a little bit, at some point you say, I got to go for it, and I think if you don't go for it, bad things happen. That energy that's frustrated, that's not going anywhere, that underground river inside you that you're not letting flow will flow into malignant channels, and like me, when I acted out on my first book and blew up a marriage, that was the creative energy flowing into some dark path and and popping up in a bad way.
Yeah, like almost like self-sabotage.
Yeah, exactly.
Sabotaging yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. So what happens if, and I know that this scenario happens a lot because people ask me this question all the time, you really want to drop the shadow career, go with where your heart wants to be, right? I know that I need to do this, but everyone around you, your friends and your family, they're almost like resistance, but in people. They're telling you, you can't do this. That's not a good idea. You should stay safe based on basically their own fear or their own resistance.
Yeah.
How do we move through this? Because this is a really difficult one.
It is. This is what, I'll tell you a story. This is my friend Kate had a friend named Bob Gilbert. These are real people. And Bob was a big-time sailor, like around-the-world sailor, big-time yachts type of thing. And he was building a boat up in Ventura in the boatyard. And Kate used to go, and it was like a year-long or year-and-a-half process of doing this. And Kate used to go up there and visit him, and just see how the boat's going, blah, blah, blah. So one time, maybe, I don't know, a long way through the construction, the ribs of the boat were there and everything. She went up and they talked for a while, and the sun was going down, and she was starting to go toward her car to leave to go home. And she said, "Bob, aren't you leaving?" And he said, "No." He says, "From now on, I sleep here with the boat every night until it's done." And she said, "Why?" And he said, I've been chills even as I said, he said, "Beware the saboteur." And apparently it is a thing that happens in boatyards, that mysterious fires will break out when a boat gets near completion, And so what that's all about, I think, is somebody sees somebody else about to succeed in doing something, and they are compelled in some way to sabotage that thing. And I think it happens in real life when you or I commit to some creative process and we sort of change ourselves. In other words, instead of going out and getting high with our buddies, we say, I can't come. I've got to work on this thing, right? And what happens is our friends will start saying things to us, like, "Jen, what's the story with you? You're what's happened to you? You're different, I don't know if we like you so much anymore." And they'll start making fun of you and knocking whatever it is that you're doing. And they will be sort of the voice of your own resistance. They'll say that same sort of thing. "Who do you think you are to pull off this stunt?" And at that point, you, the creative person, sometimes have to leave these people behind, And it's sad because a lot of times it's the people that are absolutely closest to you, your spouse, your children, your mother, your father, will try to stop you. And just to say one other thing here, because I don't want to trash the people that do that, because what's really happening is, on a psychological level, the people that are knocking you or trying to sabotage you, they're dealing with their own resistance that they're unconscious of. They're aware that they should be painting or singing or following something. And when they see you do it, they go, "Well, hey, if Jen can do it, that's a reproach to me," right? So they want to drag you down. So, in other words, it's not like they're bad people or anything. They're just dealing with their own resistance. So that is, you've heard people say, and it is true, that you sometimes have to leave people behind, leave your family behind, and you do. And what happens though then is you make new friends, because now your energy is pulling a different kind of person toward you, a person that's also doing their thing, and they see you and they go, she's one of us, and they'll reach out and help you. Anyway, that's what a shadow career is.
I love it.
Yeah.
I just got goosebumps that whole time you were talking, because I know so many people struggle with that.
Oh, I got to say one other thing
Please
here.
say all the things.
I don't think it's necessary at all to quit a career, to quit a job. It isn't an all or nothing thing. I mean, I did it, but I certainly would not recommend it. But actually, there were periods where I really didn't do it. Like when I was working in ad agencies, I would work on weekends on the book. I would work at night, but I kept my job, because I was trying to save money. So I wouldn't put pressure on anybody to say, "Oh my God, you've got to quit and become a rock star," or whatever it is. It is possible, Like James Patterson, the guy who's sold 8 bazillion copies of books, used to be the creative director of J. Walter Thompson in New York, advertising agency. And he would come in the morning at 5:30, close the door, and for like an hour and a half, he'd work on his novels. And then when the time came, he'd open his door and he did his thing as a boss of the creative department. And finally, he got to the point where his book started selling and he could leave it. But it's definitely possible to do that. And let me say one other thing.
Please.
I'm on my soapbox. Like in my life now, I'm a full-time writer, right? I don't have to do any other kind of job. But still, with all the stuff I have to do, all the BS I have to do in the course of a day, I still only get like maybe 2 hours of time to write. So if someone is out there and has a job, you can find 2 hours too and be actually working just as hard as I am. So it isn't like you need, well, maybe in some areas you need more than that, but even those full-time people don't get to do, 24 hours a day. Just a little block of time is enough.
I love it. And your whole story, just what continues to resonate just in the back of my mind is it's never too late. You didn't get your first big hit until how old were you?
52.
52. I talk to 30-year-olds all the time. There's like, it's too late for me. I can't go for it. It's too late for me. I didn't do it. And I'm like, it's you 52. And I would bet that you're working on pieces right now that still haven't even gotten their wings yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So here's a question that I have for you that I'm very curious about. And my husband and I were talking about this earlier. Like, you have to ask Stephen this. Today, now, as you who has written the book about resistance, you wrote the book about turning pro, you wrote the book about doing the work. Do you ever wake up and really not want to do the work and ever give in to resistance?
Every day. It's a nonstop thing. It never diminishes. It's the nature of reality, I think, that, in the Daily Pressfield, which is a kind of a 365-day book about resistance and stuff like that. Chapter 1 is called Resistance Wakes Up With Me. And like people ask me, when do you experience resistance in your day? And I say, the minute I open my eyes, it's just waiting for me. For some reason, there's no resistance when you're asleep or when you're dreaming. But as soon as you open your eyes, it's there trying to stop you from doing it. I read a thing where Arnold Schwarzenegger was saying just recently that his mantra when he opens his eyes in the morning is don't think. Because if he starts thinking, he's going to say, I don't really want to go to the gym today. So he says, just get up. You get up and start doing your thing. And that's my mantra too. It's always there, never changes. In a way, it gets even worse, resistance does, because it gets more nuanced. And then, the voice in your head has more subtle, diabolical ways of psyching you out.
Oh, it's a liar. It is it's so sneaky. It's such a liar. It says such creative things to me all the time.
Yeah, doesn't it?
Negotiates with me, like makes it really real why I shouldn't do the thing. Yeah. And sometimes I listen.
Yeah.
And sometimes I go and I veer off, right? And I think it's important to know, everyone that's listening right now, like you're hearing from the person that wrote the book on it, and he still sometimes has it and it wins. Sometimes, yes. But that doesn't mean it wins your life or it wins the project. It just won that moment.
Yeah.
And how do you get back on track? Let's say you're like, oh, crap, I just totally let resistance get me. And now I got to jump back on.
Just got back and do it again, you know? I have a friend I'm a gym person, and I usually start my day going to the gym, right? And a few years ago, I had a period of like 3 months where I completely fell off the wagon, I wasn't doing anything, I was getting fat. And I said my friend was a woman. And I was telling her that, I feel so bad. I haven't been at a gym, and she said, listen, for you and me, this is a lifetime commitment. So you fell off for 3 months, so you get back to it, and probably down the road, you'll fall off again. So falling off is sort of part of the reality of life. We are human. We are fallible. We do fall off the wagon, but it's just a matter of willpower again, just, getting back into it and keep doing it. Just knowing that once you can't stay off the wagon, that for sure you can't do that. You got to get back on.
You get back on. And what about for people that don't know what they want to do? You said this really impactful thing. I don't remember what podcast it was on or what book it was in. I've consumed so much of your content. But it was really profound. And it was the question to ask yourself to figure out like what it is that's your true calling, what you truly want to do. And it's the thing that you would do if there was nobody on earth anymore. Right.
Yeah.
And nobody could see you fail. No one could see you mess up. No one could even see you do it. What would you still be doing?
Yeah, that's a great question to ask yourself, because if you're in other words, the question is, if I was the last person on earth, what would I do? And the reason that's important is because it eliminates any idea of what other people think of you. Everybody else is gone. So the only question is, what would you do? You know, like if I was the last person on earth, I'd keep writing, even though nobody was going to read it or anything like that, because I would just know that that's what my calling is. That's what my soul wants to do. But I would also ask myself, what am I afraid of? You know, if you're searching for something, what scares me? You know, doing stand-up comedy or, you know, something like that. And I'll tell you another story that I think is true story. The son of a friend of mine, this is about finding your calling, whatever it was. He graduated from high school, whatever it was. He joined the Marine Corps. He went over to Iraq, Afghanistan, whatever it was. And when he came back, he felt like, you know, this isn't for me. I don't want to be hurting people. I want to be helping people. So he comes from a family that really values education. So he got a degree as a hospital administrator, whatever that was, 2-3 year, whatever it was. And this is kind of on the subject of you go wrong a little bit, you switch to another. And then he became a hospital administrator, and he did really well for however long this was, but he wasn't happy. He still wasn't happy. He felt like, okay, I'm helping people. I'm doing things that help people. But he sort of realized to himself, but I'm just pushing papers around. I'm at the supervisory level. And he said, what I really want to be, I want to be in the room with the patient that's suffering so that I can help that person, you know, give them courage or whatever it is. So he left the hospital administrator and became a nurse. And that was his calling. Didn't become a doctor. He became a nurse. And so that sort of the story there is like he was on the path in the beginning, like when he joined the Marine Corps, you could see that service was important to him. He didn't take something that would make a lot of money, but he wanted to do something that would serve people. But that wasn't exactly it. So then he shifted over to hospital administrator, but he said, that's too far away from the actual person that needs help. And then finally he said, okay, I want to be a nurse. Now, when he was in the recruiting office of the Marine Corps, if you and I had come up to him and said, you know, hey, Joe, you should be a nurse, he would go, get out of here, you know. But after the failure, or the coming close, kind of an adjacent career, slightly more adjacent and a little bit more, finally he got there. So I think sometimes it takes time. You know, I don't know if you're a fan of Robert Greene. I am. Yeah. But he certainly talks about in your 20s and early 30s, you should be doing a lot of different jobs and exposing yourself to a lot of different things, because you're trying to ask yourself, what is it I really love? You know, is it this? Is it this? Is it this? And I think we sort of find our way little by little to it. So,
I love that. I have this vision that I use that you might appreciate. I call it like the magical treasure map. And it's like an invisible treasure map. There's nothing there except the start point. But every time you take a step in a direction, another little ... goes to the next place. But you can't get the ... to the next direction until you take a step forward.
I like that a lot.
So you have absolutely no idea how you're going to end up to the end. In order to do that, you have to take the steps.
Yeah, I think that's great. So that would take the pressure off. If you think in that way, you take the pressure off yourself of having to find it now. You know, you're 22 years old, you're 25 years old, you know. It's just too hard to do it. You have to go this little treasure map, the little ... and finally you'll get there.
Yeah. Did you think that you were going to be the Stephen Pressfield author that you are now when you were a kid?
No.
What did you think you were going to be?
I mean, I just had regular dreams like any other kid of playing center field for the Yankees or something like that. Yeah, no, I never thought about that at all. I envy people who do have that, who know they're musicians or something from the start, but it took me a long, long time.
When was the moment that you realized, holy crap, this is what I need to do for the rest of my life? I need to write.
It's a moment that I talk about in The War of Art, where I've sat down at the typewriter for the first time after avoiding it for however many years. And I sat down crazy, and I got up sane, even though I hadn't done anything for those 2 hours that was worth anything. But I realized somehow that, again, it was sort of a mysterious, magical thing in some way, because this thing of sitting down to write had not worked for me before. But all of a sudden, it did work for me in the sense that I could just tell that this was what I was meant to do one way or another. Like, I'm sure dancers, when they first dance, they go, this is it, or stand-up comedians or actors or actresses, they know, this is it. This is what I was meant to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sometimes you have to try a bunch of things before you have that. This is it.
Yeah.
This is what I'm meant to do.
And you can try the same thing and it doesn't work and doesn't work and doesn't work. And then somehow it does. Don't ask me why.
Get outside of your comfort zone and into your best life, one small step at a time.
It's so crazy. And I love how non-linear your story is. It just gives everybody permission to be messy in your journey. I mean, your memoir that you just wrote. So did you ever in your journey think that you were going to write a memoir?
No. In fact, I really wanted to avoid it at all costs.
But you did it, and it's amazing. And I think that everyone should read this memoir because it tells the journey and the story of like how just many different directions you went in before you actually got to where you are today as a writer. And what's the most surprising thing that you want people to know about your journey? And like that, you guys would probably never guess this, but I don't know.
Well, the thing I would say, not so much about mine, but for anybody's that's on a journey, is how long it takes, that particularly these days with social media where everybody feels under pressure to immediately have the life goes viral and everything is, from the moment I finished that first book that I just told you about, which was still like 7 years from when I started, there was still like another 30 years or something before I was going to actually break through. And even, with the Legend of Bagger Vance, so my advance on that was like $25,000. It wasn't like, and I had already spent that before I even got the check. So it wasn't like all of a sudden, your life changes in a financial sense, it might change otherwise, but that just the fact that it's a long process, and if you can enjoy it, and have faith along the way and not torture yourself like I did.
How do you not torture yourself now going forward?
Well, now I really feel like, since I've really started writing books only, I really feel like I'm on my path. I found what I want to do. And now all I really want to do is be able to keep doing it. Mm-hmm. So it's not torture at all.
Would you say that being a writer now in 2024 and with social media and the way that books are marketed is much different than it used to be?
Oh, yeah, way different.
How are you adapting?
Marketing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I would really ask you about this, Jen.
We can talk about it.
Like when I wrote my second book was Gates of Fire, about the 300 Spartans at Thermopylae, and this was 1997 or something like that. And when it came out, it got reviewed twice in the New York Times and got reviewed everywhere, and it became a hit. Nowadays, there is no chance whatsoever that first of all, there are no book reviews anymore, except in the New York Times and the LA Times and a couple more. But there used to be a book review section in, the Dallas Morning Herald, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Boston Globe, you name it. Now those are all gone, as newspapers are gone. Nobody's reading newspapers. So basically, as a writer of books, there's no way to get the word out unless you yourself do it, And so that becomes social media and podcasts and all sorts of other things, having a following, all of those things that didn't exist. I mean, Hemingway never had to do anything like that. But nowadays, and of course, the other thing is that people don't read as much as at all, really. It's funny that they still buy books. I buy 1 million books. I mean, I can't believe at the end of the year how much money I've spent on books. But yet people don't really read. So it's tough. It's a tough racket to break into.
Did you have to shift your mindset when it came to starting to promote yourself on social media?
Absolutely. And it was, talk about resistance.
Yeah.
For me,
tell me about it.
That was huge resistance. I mean, I think a lot of creative people, it's sort of a classic thing with painters. that they always underprice their paintings, right? Oh, here, I'll give it to you, $50, when a pro painter would be charging, $15,000 for, but creative people, and I include myself in that, usually feel like, oh, I did it, so it can't be really that kind of thing, right? And also, it goes against the grain, I think, to promote yourself. You always hope that a third party will say, read so-and-so or that. But, of course, that happens very rarely. So it's really hard for a lot of people, including me, to get out there and kind of flog my own stuff. Because what are you going to say? Oh, I just wrote a book and it's really great. Nobody could get out of here, So it is hard. I mean, what's been your experience with that, Jen?
Well, I wrote a book called Be Seen. That's my only book that I ever wrote. Find your voice, build your brand, live your dream. So it's all about the courage to be seen. It's all about, so I'm going to give you a really great example. If you didn't make yourself known and make yourself seen to me in the ways that I found you, which is the internet and, people talking about you, but really a lot of podcasts that I listen to. So you getting out there and going on people's podcasts and having those conversations and marketing yourself and talking about your books and having your content out in the world. I would not be the person that I am today. I wouldn't have the TEDx talk that I just had where I quoted you twice. I would not have this beautiful keynote that I do where I know I really help people and I end it with your statement. And I probably wouldn't have written my book because there was so much resistance with writing my book. And I had you in the back of my mind, start before you're ready. That's resistance. That's fear. So basically, you being seen and you putting yourself out there was helping so many more people than you even know because it gave me courage to get out there and put myself out there. So you had no idea what you were doing. And what I always say is visibility is your responsibility if you have something that can help people. And like whether it is your fiction books that entertain people or it's your nonfiction books that help people, if it's just sitting there and nobody knows about it and you're not showcasing it where people's attention is, basically podcasts, social media, all the places now that are totally different than where they used to be, then those people are going to go read somebody else's book or follow somebody else that maybe isn't as good as you, and they might not get impacted in the way that you could have impacted them. So I need to thank you for being seen and being visible, and you're out there on all the podcasts. You have made
yourself visible as well, not just in in this connection, but in all of the other stuff that you're doing.
Of course, and it's terrifying. And it's terrifying. I get
you're terrified as well.
Of course. I mean, I get better as I go. Totally. And I was like, it's scary whenever you're, like you just said, you need to feel the fear or it's not worth it.
Yeah.
And so, here's a good example. So you just told me that you're doing a writer's retreat for the first time. Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's very exciting. Very cool. And were you terrified to do that because you've never?
Yeah, I haven't done it yet, and I am terrified. Yeah, it's coming up in 2 weeks, and I'm terrified that I'll get 20 minutes into it and run out of things to say.
Well, where did the idea come from, and what made you decide to go for it? Because I'd love to hear the process of resistance with starting something like that, because I know a lot of people are also struggling.
Bells.
Yeah.
It actually was a friend of mine, a woman. Her name is Rhoda Ahmed, and she's kind of a fan, but she's also great at publicizing her own self and her own material and loves to kind of put on events. And so she just said to me, you got to do this. We got to have she said, I'll take care of everything. All you got to do is show up. And I would never have done it without her. So in that case, it's finding a partner or finding somebody that you can work with. I could never do it myself, organizing the whole thing.
But you're going to do it.
I'm going to do it. We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens. And you're just going to overcome the resistance.
Yeah.
And no matter what. So what would you say to the person? And I really want to, I know why people are listening to this podcast. The majority of them are like, I have a dream. I have an idea. I have a goal. I have a purpose in my heart that I'm just absolutely terrified to put into action. And they keep putting it off. They keep putting it off. They keep saying they're going to do it tomorrow. They keep saying, okay, next year I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it when the kids are out of school. I'm going to do it when I find the spouse. I'm going to do it when I lose the weight. What would Stephen Pressfield, the writer of The War of Art, say to them about starting?
Well, this is from you, Jen. This is your mantra. But what helps me to do this is my little mantra is start before you're ready. And that's really important. Start like now, today, an hour from now, because one of the ways resistance stops us, first of all, it's really strong at the beginning of anything. To plunge in is really, really hard. And many people live their entire lives that way. They never do the first thing. They wake up and they're 70 years old and they never have done the thing. But other people who do a little better than that will say, okay, I'm going to do it, just like you said, but let me prepare. Let me do some research. Let me, whatever they tell you in an MBA program, but that's bullshit, The answer is really start, because once you start, a certain magic happens. The muse sees you, and I mean, like, if you're writing, if we're talking about a novel, start writing chapter 1. Even if you don't know what the ending is, just start writing it, even if you'll throw it away, and you will throw it away. Yeah. Just get rolling, or if it's a podcast, whatever that you want to do, whatever the first step is, buy a camera or something like that. But definitely there's magic to starting. Starting is everything. And then, of course, once you do day 1, you got to do day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. So yeah, that's getting started is a killer. Resistance is really, really strong at the beginning. But once you overcome it and you get some momentum going, then it's a lot easier.
You take away the power that it has over you once you start. Because you're like, haha, proved you wrong. I got that first step out of the way.
Yeah.
Right? Like this podcast, before it was a video, I was telling Angelito over there that I started this podcast because of you, because the start before you're ready. I was like, I'm not ready. I can't do these video interviews. So I sat on the floor in my closet one day. I was like, screw it. I keep putting off this podcast. I know I need to do it. And I keep putting it off because of resistance. So I took this little tiny microphone that plugs into my iPhone and I sat on the floor in my closet and I recorded an episode. And I was like, just put it out there. I don't even care. It's terrible.
Just yourself. You mean
just
no
by
guest?
Myself.
Wow. That is a great story. Can I steal that, Jen? That is a great story.
Yeah. And it was just me. And it wasn't even called Jen Gottlieb Show then. It was called the I Dare You podcast. And it was
good
totally
for you.
different.
That took a lot of guts. And, it was a real leap into the dark, God bless you. That was great.
Thank you. But I would have never turned into this, where I get to interview some of my favorite people in the world.
But you did it.
If I didn't start.
Yeah.
Yeah. Same thing with like pretty much everything. And that's why I love this conversation, because it doesn't have to be perfect. Your chapter 1's not going to look like somebody else's chapter 20. Your journey is not going to be linear. It's not too late for you. And I think that you're just the most beautiful example of this. And I want to, just as we finish up here, just acknowledge you so much for the work that you do in the world. And I'm so
thanks for having me on here, Jennifer. And thanks for,
Jennifer Works,
whatever. And thank you for, for the kind words and,
of course,
give me a chance to shoot my mouth off.
Oh my gosh, this was so powerful. This was so impactful. Where can people find you the most? Like, what would you like for people to do when they get off of this podcast to check out more of your work?
My books are on Amazon.
Yep.
I have a website that's just my name, Stephen Pressfield, and the newest book, The Daily Pressfield, is out now. A 365-day thing that will sort of actually kind of reinforce what we've been talking about here, taking it from day 1 to day 365 of a project. And I'm on Instagram, just my name. I'm everywhere.
Yeah, you are.
No, but it's easy enough to find me somewhere.
So easy. And I have to talk about the Daily Pressfield really quick. So if you are starting a new project, I've been recently starting a very scary new project, and I've been reading 1 page a day. It's a great accountability tool to wake up and just have that moment with yourself, right? Don't think. I wake up and I read a page of the Daily Pressfield every day. So you guys go grab the Daily Pressfield and read it 1 page a day if you're starting something new. And I hope that everybody that's listening, whatever your idea is, whatever that is, whatever your dream is, just start. Just start. You never know what will happen. You'll find clarity along the way, right?
Well, you're a great example of that. It'd be in the closet with your iPhone. That's a great story.
Thank you. Well, you can use it.
I will.
You can do whatever you want.
I will. I'll do it in my writing retreat. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah. Stephen Pressfield, thank you so much for
Jen,
being
thank
here.
you so much.
So grateful for you.
This is great.
Thanks for watching the Jen Gottlieb Show. See you next time.